You may begin.
Good evening. My name is Kelvin Rodriguez. Thank you all for being here. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems to us, with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. This is what President Donald Trump said during his announcement speech at the start of his campaign back in 2016 for the presidential election. Many of you here feel that illegal immigration is an issue, but also believe that the wall is not the solution to the immigration problem. Even though most of you believe the southern border is the most used form of illegal immigration. I was not born in the U.S. I myself am an immigrant. My family migrated a month and a half after I was born and had to deal with the legal process of staying in this country. I also know many immigrants that have come into this country illegally, through many different means. I have also spent the past few days studying the status of the current border and the geographical challenges of a complete wall on the southern border. I would like to speak to you about the cost of the wall, the geographical challenges of completing the wall, and how the wall would not stop the many other forms of illegal immigration happening now. I would like to first talk about the cost of completing the wall along the southern border. Before the 2016 election, there were already 654 miles of barrier along the southern border, 354 miles of which were to stop pedestrian traffic, and the other 300 to stop vehicle traffic. The majority of this on the western part of the border before Rio Grande, El Paso, Texas. According to an article on BBC News by Lucy Rogers and Dominic Bailey, since Mr. Trump entered the White House, although some of the already existing barriers have been replaced, work on extending the current barrier only just begun. Overall, Congress has so far approved $1.7 billion in funding for 124 miles of new and replacement barrier since Mr. Trump entered the White House. Just over 40 miles of replacement barrier have been built or begun by the end of 2018. Construction was expected to start on 61 more miles of the replacement barrier in 2019. This equates to new sections of about 15% of existing structures. The other thing to take into account is the actual cost of building the border, as no one knows the actual cost would be to the taxpayer. On the same article, Rogers and Bailey state, the 650 miles of fencing built under President George W. Bush cost an estimate of $7 billion, and it could not be described as fulfilling Mr. Trump's promise of a tall, powerful, beautiful barrier. The current estimates run from $12 billion to $70 billion, depending on who you ask. And here are some of the prototypes that have been shown to the government. I would like next to speak to you about the geographical challenges that come with building a wall along the entire southern border, including land disputes that will come from federal land forfeitures. As stated before, the current barrier along the southern border, most of the southern border is on the western side before El Paso, Texas. The southern border actually extends from San Diego all the way out to the Gulf of Mexico, Brownsville, Texas. As stated in another article from BBC News by Lucy Rogers and Nassos Styliano, in fact, the border is actually in many places defined as the deepest channel of the river. Building a wall in the middle of the Rio Grande would be challenging for obvious reasons, but there's also legal issues. A treaty signed by Mexico and the U.S. in 1889 prevents any disruption of to the flow of the river, meaning any border wall would probably be built on its banks. This again presents obvious problems. Existing border fence often sits far from the river outside its floodplains, leaving a wide gap between the fence and the official border. This means that some US citizens would be forced to live on the Mexican side of the fence in a kind of limbo between the two countries. They also state, meanwhile, Arizona and New Mexico are mountainous, Coronado National Forest in southeastern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico has several 9,000-foot peaks. Some of these pictures are actually from that area. Kyle Allman states in an article for CNN, but the U.S. Border Patrol agents have all sorts of high-tech surveillance equipment to help them, from motion sensor cameras to drones to tethered aerostat balloons that fly high over the border and provide a 360-degree view of the border 24/7. There's no doubt that fencing is a deterrent, but it's just a part of a larger, more holistic approach that Homeland Security takes towards border security. Moore said, John Moore is a Getty Images photographer based out of New York. He spent the past decade pretty much covering the Mexican and U.S. side of the border. I would like to lastly speak to you about the other forms of illegal immigration that occur and how the wall will not prevent them. The biggest cause of illegal immigration in the U.S. is from visa overstayers. In the previous BBC News article, Rogers and Bailey state, while almost 400,000 people were apprehended trying to cross the southern border illegally last year, more than 700,000 people who entered the U.S. legally overstayed their expected departure date in 2018, according to DHS stats. The border wall in itself is also susceptible to tunnels, as stated by Christine Phillips in an article for the Washington Post. One tunnel is about 50 feet long, unfinished, and stretched across two countries. It starts along the drainage channels that the U.S. border town shares with Mexico and abruptly ends underneath a parking lot in Arizona. Another one runs about 80 feet, also unfinished. Its openings was found inside an abandoned store in the Mexican border city of Nogales. A third one, about 30 feet, also found somewhere in Nogales, though it's unclear where it starts or ends. These tunnels, which authorities suspect were built to smuggle illegal contraband or people across the border, were found within the past month. As President Trump continues to demand $5.7 billion to build a border wall between the United States and Mexico. The stalemate over Trump's signature campaign promise has resulted in what is now the longest government shutdown in the country's history. This is speaking about the government shutdown that happened at the beginning of 2019. Leaving thousands of federal workers without pay. The president has argued that building physical barriers would stave off illegal immigration and drug trafficking into the United States. But experts say these tunnels reaffirm the reality at the southern border. Drugs are trafficked into the country through multiple channels, including underground. A physical barrier, whether it's fencing, steel slats, or a concrete wall, will not keep out people who are willing to play. Would keep out people who are willing to play by the rules, but not those who aren't or can't afford to. Walls are mere temporary inconveniences, said David Scher, an international relations professor at the University of San Diego. One other key fact about tunnels is that since the year 2000, there have been 90 tunnels discovered on the southern border. In conclusion, there are many challenges to building a wall along with border costs, geography, as well as the fact that it would not stop the most effective way of getting into the country, which is legal visas. As stated above, other devices are used to secure the border that are not a wall or a fence that are used by the Department of Homeland Security that can cost about the same to purchase, but may cost less to maintain in the long run. I would like to leave you with an excerpt from the American poet Emma Lazarus Lazarus is the new Colossus, which is cast on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Thank you.